evolution in divine love is an invitation to reimagine everything from the place where it all begins and where it all returns. Love.
Welcome, friends. Today we have the profound honor and pleasure in exploring a section from the Evolution in Divine Love book, and it is titled The Continuation of Wonder, Delving Deeper Beyond Noun and Verb. So first we'll be speaking with Swami Padmanabha, the author of the book of this paradigm shifts, and that will be followed by a conversation with Jaya Jagannatha, who is a wonderful, very full of wonder practitioner and teacher. So in our time together today, we will delve into this radical thesis of an ever-becoming God, one whose potencies are infinite and whose love is both steady and ever fresh, and whose very essence is play. So let's let the adventure begin. So good day to you, Maharaj. You're in France now, so thank you for joining us here from across the ocean. For me personally, one of the most striking insights that is in the book is that love is not a goal, but rather a purpose. And not only a purpose, but the purpose of purpose that gives meaning. It's meaning. So in a world where we're constantly being pushed towards achievement and results, this new way of thinking really invites us to consider what really drives us. So my question for you today is, at least to begin with, is what does it look like to, in practice, in shape, to let love and not achievement or success or even duty to be the guiding force of our actions and relationships?
Thank you for that question. In itself, the question invites for contemplation of the question itself. All that is included there. And yes, I will say that love, and this is not my own idea, of course, this is what love is. And one trying to just articulate a glimpse of the reality of realities, the core of reality, the purpose of purpose, the meaning of meaning, love. It may sound quite counterintuitive, as you properly say, to a world we live in which everything is goal-oriented, achievement-oriented. It's all about triumphing, colonizing, progressing, but many sense of emptiness, pursuing a form of perfection out of self-hatred many times. Because of a lack of self-acceptance, we want to change. So that's a very different motivation for changing out of fullness and out of gratitude and out of celebration and out of love, which propels itself to further transformation, metamorphosis, and unfolding. So that's the interesting thing that, well, in the book we talked about evolution and growth and change and transformation. It all ideally comes from love becoming further love, so completeness attaining further completeness, which is very different from the narrative, contemporary narrative of progress and goal achievement out of emptiness, out of a disconnect from our basic foundation and existence, out of, again, self-loathing. So I cannot bear myself. I cannot tolerate seeing myself as how I see myself. So therefore, I need to change. Everyone needs to change. Everything needs to change. But it's coming from a very dry place of emptiness. So the proposal here is, yeah, we have nothing against change, growth, evolution, but that perpetual unfolding has to come as a result of fulfillment, positive value, positive content. That's how love has been perpetually evolving, basically, out of a positive sense of what it is. And from that, a positive appreciation of all that it can be, can become. So I think it's always important to examine our foundational motives, so to say. Do we start with an om, with a yes, with a positive appreciation to things, or we are trying to change, transform, evolve, attain, achieve, whether in spiritual terms, in economic terms, socio-political terms, whatever, out of a place of lacking and emptiness? And so those will be some of my initial thoughts to that.
Yeah, thank you for those. And it leads so beautifully into, as you talk about in this section, about the concept of play and how God is very playful, and this playfulness is coming out of a fullness as opposed to a lack.
Yeah, playfulness, right? We can make that play of words. Playfulness. Real playfulness comes from a place of, from a play of fullness. From a place of fullness and from a play of fullness, playfulness. Yeah, play is celebratory movement, real play, real place, for its own sake, for its own purpose. And love is its own reward. Plays for its own sake, real play, ultimate play, the one in which the sweet absolute engages in. And yeah, that's unique. The word divine, divinity, comes from this Sanskrit term deva, which in itself comes from the Sanskrit root div, which can mean to play, can mean liked. So it will be something like enlightened play. So how to engage in play from an enlightened place, again, from a place of fullness. That's the natural outcome, the natural consequence of contacting reality for what it is. It's celebratory. So that's again another interesting idea. We use the word play in one sense, but we also generally, as so-called adults, we limit the notion of play to children. Children are supposed to play. We as adults have no longer reasons to play, which will be another way of saying we have no more reasons to celebrate, because you ultimately play celebratory movements. So okay, kids can still celebrate, can still play, can still be at wonder, can still be happy, but we adults have more important things to do rather than playing and celebrating and being at wonder with reality, which of course that's not the idea. And that's why whether in the Rig Veda or in the Bible, you have similar statements like you have to become like a child to enter the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God. So yeah, it's interesting. And there are, of course, books about that, about the importance of keeping the notion of play in place throughout our lives, how to remain playful as an adult, how to contact the idea of organic, spontaneous action, movement, which in itself is its own reward, so to say, which is, again, not for the sake of something else. So this is mainly, I will say, the interesting notion of play, that you are not doing that to achieve something else, which is very parallel to the notion of bhakti in our tradition, right? We do not do bhakti to achieve something else, but Bhakti comes from bhakti, bhakti goes to bhakti. So we are engaging in something that we won't continue to engage. So we are doing that for its own sake, not for a separate reward. So I think it's very crucial for all of us to somehow or other understand the idea of play properly as adults, as something that is for its own sake, that is not looking for something else outside of itself, and how that mirrors back to what we are supposed to be doing with our spiritual life in bhakti, doing something for its own sake and finding enough reasons to celebrate, to be grateful. That's the other day I was thinking about that in connection to the words of Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9, verse 2, which in time is becoming more and more probably my favorite verse of the Gita, one of those, because there's so much, each word has so much in it. And at one point, Krishna says, Susukam kartum. Bhakti is to be performed, executed, expressed with lots of joy. So again, for me, that doesn't mean that we have to become like harmony junkies and always smiling and everything is fine always. We can grieve, we can go through hardship, but still there are enough reasons to celebrate, even in the midst of tragedy, something like that. That's how I'm understanding. Practice bhakti with lots of joy, with lots of gratitude, with lots of purpose, with enough, lots of reasons to say yes, basically, right? So anyhow, all that tie back to the idea of play, celebratory movement, and something done for its own sake, and how that mirrors what bhakti is supposed to be in our lives.
Yeah, that's so full and so much to think about. And just going back just a few moments to discussing children and play, I was thinking of this too, and how much if you watch young children, there's a lot of spontaneous play just out of joy, just for the sake of playing, and their imagination runs wild and they create all kinds of stories and that they enact. But what happens, what play now seems to be is a lot more of competitive sport, where for children they don't even get that space of imaginative space to play. Now they're guided into some kind of competitive sport where there is goal oriented and achievement oriented. So I was thinking of that in relationship, and how it might be helpful to understand as an adult, like we say, playing an instrument, musical instrument. So just it struck me as interesting as to why we would say that we're playing a musical instrument as opposed to something else, because it seems to be facilitate an expression of joy just for its own sake.
Yeah, that reminds me about this wonderful book I read decades ago called Free Play, which is the subtitle is something like The Art of Improvisation in Music and Life. And basically speaks about that, right? Like improvisation, if music is not it doesn't have a predetermined script. It has some perimeter, okay, this tone, this rhythm, but in the context of that, that's sheer play. And the author ties all that to the notion of līlā. In fact, the book starts with a description of Krishna līlā. So in the context of something done for its own sake, and when the participants, because again, play means something participatory, inviting for participation, for organic, spontaneous participation. So the nature of that invitation or the nature of that play is to be really basically engrossed in the play or lost and found in play. And that's what we will argue in our tradition, that the divine himself, herself, themselves become so engrossed in play that they lost themselves, only to, of course, find themselves again, rediscover themselves one over and over again at every layer of the divine play or līlā unfolds, to the point that God loses sight that he's God, that we will put it that way. That's how consuming play can be when you play seriously, quote unquote, right? When you commit yourself to the invitation. So Yeah, that's a very interesting way that always has been fascinating for me, and has. Today in the morning I was reflecting on that, while I of course love to expose myself to various sister traditions, mystical schools, and so much richness is coming from everywhere. But at the same time, I was thinking today in the morning, yeah, but I'm very biased towards Gaudiya Vaishnavism. There are many too special, charming, unique, even ideas. Of course, they're not only ideas, but even if for the moment they still remain an idea and not a fully actualized experiential reality, but just on a conceptual level, these notions like play and the divine engross in place and losing sight of his own divinity, and the capacity of that play to consume all our faculties. Even in theory, all that is enough, at least for me, to commit myself to the path, so to say, and of course with the hope that the theory and the concept will become experience at some point, more and more. Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely is attractive. I mean, I think even for me, that's one of the most attractive things about this practice, or the philosophy, the idea of playfulness just somehow feels like light and fun. I was also thinking how, as we grow up, somehow, like we think we know, like as we grow, we think like we know more now. So the more we know, we feel like now we have more serious things to do. Now we can't be engaged in playing, which kind of ties to this idea of omniscience. Like I was thinking how it can be a projection for us to think the God has to be like fully omniscient, because we think knowing more is good. Like, so if we don't know, then that's like, yeah, it's we are less or something like that. Like somehow we have to always be knowing. So that would mean God has to always know everything. So, which you also like, you touch upon the on omniscience in this section, and you say how it's nuanced. Yeah, there are aspects of love, like God himself doesn't know how all of this is unfolding.
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah, that's a very important point that is coming in newer layers. I remember recently, a few weeks ago, when we are recording this conversation, now I'm in France, but I was in Austria a few weeks ago, and we were talking about how our tradition would say rasa vaisaha, the absolute is rasa, or sacred rapture. And then other sections in our scriptures say rasa sar chamatkar, the essence of rasa is wonder. So the absolute is rasa, and the essence of rasa is wonder. Therefore, the absolute's essence is wonder. So if you know everything in advance, there can be no wonder, right? We are making for in pushing the notion of omniscience to its limit. Inadvertently, you are doing away with wonder. So that's why whenever we try to say something about the absolute, which in itself is a challenge, we should be very, I will say, theologically astute to not make our points to a point that other crucial qualities are being dispensed with in the context of doing that. So if I insist so much God is omniscient to this point, and the price to pay is he's no longer experiencing wonder, you have deprived the absolute of his very essence. No. So it's very important to, okay, I'm not saying with this day let's discard wonder altogether, but let's speak of wonder in a way that keeps all the other attributes of the infinite in a coherent conversation with each other, in a coherence coexisting, right? So yeah, and I agree with what you say, Swetadebratika, that many times it's our own needs and our own projection based on our own needs or our own assumptions and beliefs, like knowing more is better because, again, knowing more many times for us, quote unquote, adults gives us a sense of certainty and security, and what we know we can eventually control and measure and manipulate, and it becomes predictable. It's in our service, which basically is the antithesis of reality. It's not that the things have to be measurable so they are in our service, but the question is what I am of service to, who is my object of service, and that's not something measurable. So yeah, it's good to deconstruct what's behind many times our insistence of things that the insistence may seem very religiously, spiritually correct, loyal, but behind all that there may be fear, toxic certainty, a desire to control, manipulate, and have things in our service, right? So yeah, this notion of play and seriousness, I would say, like you were saying, Bhakti, someone may think, okay, no more time to play, now it's time to be adult, to be serious. But actually, play and seriousness doesn't need to be two separate things. No, actually, when we explore the nature of the līlā, divine play, we see there is so much seriousness there, in the sense they are taking so seriously what's happening at every moment, as sometimes we say, in their loving separation, divine God and the divine goddess are about to die. And every of the participants of the play are willing to give their lives, as poetically saying the scripture, willing to die millions of times just to facilitate a second of relief to them in that moment of separation. So that means that's pretty serious affair going on there. But we will call all that play at the same time, līlā. No? So play doesn't mean something how to say, nonsensical or superficial or childish, but there is a second naivety, as we will say sometimes, a type of innocence that integrates complexity. So it's a very sophisticated play, if you will, and very serious at the same time. So yeah, I think we all need, as so-called adults, to reconceive, rethink about what's the role of play in my life. How much am I allowing play in my life, and what form it takes, and how that can be connected to the notion of ultimate play, a playful God, playful reality, which at the same time is serious, which at the same time integrates complexity and pain and suffering and grieving. I mean, so many things are going on there. Again, plays, it doesn't necessarily mean only what we can think about it. So yeah, that's a good invitation we are receiving. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, wow.
I think
I was just saying that's something to think about deeply. Like, what does it mean? What does it mean to play? Like,
Yeah, because where God is playing 24/7, so we want to enter into a reality where there's non-stop līlā. Even this creation where we are in now, so to say, in terms of consciousness, is called Srishti Līlā, the play of creation. So in one sense, everything is līlā, but at the same time, we need to understand what do we mean by līlā. So we don't take the word līlā or play as cheap, as random, as nonsensical, as superficial, but something that invites for deep, commitment, participation, investment.
the word that comes up in this section, when you describe God as being more interested in adventure, I think that's the word adventure really captures both a playfulness and a seriousness, everything that is involved in becoming. So you say that he's interested in adventure more than preserving the status quo. So
Who said that?
It's in this chapter.
But there's someone else saying that.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm quoting Ilya there.
Yeah.
So that's based on, and it's very nicely connected to the name Urukrama in Sanskrit, which is a name for sweet absolute, which means the Urukrama literally means he who takes very bold steps. Krama means steps, or sequence steps, yeah. And Uru means like very bold, wild. And so sometimes he who takes very bold steps is translated as the great adventurer. So it all fits together. And for me, again, I'm including there Līlā because for me it's wonderful to. Okay, here we have a Franciscan nun who is saying basically the same thing without using the word Līlā, without using the word Urukrama, but reaching intuitively a very similar conclusion. In fact, I recall, as I always say many times, when I invited her to my podcast, the Free Radical podcast, and I was talking exactly about this with her, Līlā, and she was nodding all the time, yeah. And at one point, she couldn't contain herself and interrupted. I think I'm a Hindu, basically, she said. No, so there we are, no, all trying to enter into adventure. Yeah, that's what makes God's heart pulse and vibrate more and more. No, that preserving the status quo. That's again real preservation of the status quo is keeping the adventure going on. We will put it that way. That's the ultimate status quo.
I know I'm pushing the envelope of the time of this section, but I have one question to pose to you in regards to this, is that adventure also means risk, and that's part of it. So I'm wondering what you see as God's greatest risk that he himself takes, and what this might reveal about the risks that we ourselves are called to take in our spiritual life.
We need a whole podcast series to speak about that. I will say something, but it's too big of a topic and reminds me actually of a recent exchange I had with an author, maybe you may recall, where she spoke about she was referred to me by Richard Rohr, and she wrote an article on erotic decisions, and we ended up having a conversation. And I mean, it was interesting because she didn't know anything about Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and right from the beginning of the interaction, I was talking about Parakya Bhav and the unmarried love the gopis for Krishna in terms of risk-taking, and we could have a conversation with a newcomer, so to say, but to talk about Parakya Bhav in a way that made deep sense for both. No? How, yeah, the ultimate form of love is inviting us to get rid of sarvopadi vinirmuktam, we'll say in our tradition. Get absolutely free, get rid of all false designations. And even when you're officially free from all designations, still love will call you to let go of non-updated versions of yourself, so to say. And I like to connect that with the Sanskrit word pratishta, which many times is used in our tradition, and it's translated sometimes as someone looking for fame or name, and it's generally very much considered as almost the worst thing you could possibly do. But interestingly, the word pratishta, no, prati, shta. No, shta means like nishta. Shta means like something firm, fixed. And prati means like all around. Not all around, at every step. Look, at every moment looking for something, for certainty, basically. Again, so we translate that as he wants fame, he wants name, he wants recognition, but actually is looking for constant stability, security, certainty, rather than the actual nature of love, who calls for what we will call abhayatva, which is fearlessness, right? So that's a very interesting point that I'm thinking in terms of the risk-taking nature of love. It's not that there's actually a risk, if you will, but it's like you are fearless and you're embracing uncertainty, but there's a deeper underlying trust in that journey, like we will see in the gopis of Vrindavan and any other lover of God. So for most of us, wherever we are, yeah, we need to transcend pratishta, but I think it's good to understand pratishta as the addiction to to security, predictability, certainty, and then willingness to embrace the wild call of love, which may call us at any time of the day, in any direction we were not thinking about, and in a particular ways that we were not planning. But that's the whole idea, right? So just a few thoughts. Again, this deserves a whole separate book and podcast series, so let's see what happens with that in the future.
Well, thank you for that, and for all of the new things that now we have to contemplate. So
we are all together in the contemplation. Thank you for bringing those things as well for me.
So continuing with our conversation of the continuation of wonder, we welcome Jaya Jagannatha here to the arena. And Jaya Jagannatha, if you don't know him, I'm sorry about that, but you'll get to meet him today. He is a spiritual educator in Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition. And he offers many workshops and seminars, as well as online classes on sacred texts. And he's been providing spiritual counseling for over a decade. For me, what really speaks and charms me about Jaya Jagannatha is his incessant sense of wonder. And that's why I thought that Jaya Jagannatha would be ideal for today's topic. So thanks for joining us here.
Thank you, Bhakti Rasa, for having me and for that, cueing me into why I'm here today.
Yeah, my pleasure. So I'm gonna start us off with a bit of a quest, where, having had attended a workshop that you gave in Michigan a few years ago, and kind of coming in contact with how you embrace quest. I was thinking that I'd start off here. I asked Maharaj this question also previously today, and I'd love to hear how you address it. But in this section of the book, Maharaj quotes Ilia Delio as saying that God is more interested in adventure than he is in preserving the status quo. So I'm wondering how this vision of God challenges the traditional vision, the traditional images that come up surrounding God. And then also, like, how God's adventurous nature, how that suggests, what it suggests about our own spiritual life and our willingness to risk. So do you have any thoughts about that?
I probably have too many thoughts about that, which means that to articulate them in a proper method that is easily received and communicable could be a little bit challenging. But I think where I would first start off is that to the first question is one thing that I've noticed about religious orthodoxy, rather in my own tradition, in my observation of other traditions, is the tendency to impose a formula onto the spiritual life. And so if you do this, then this will be the particular result. In my own upbringing, in my own spiritual community, we have a very clear formula of how to make spiritual advancement. You know, this set of rounds done on meditation beads or mala, and following a few certain principles, and then this will be the result. And one thing that I have observed in this Sangha, personally, but also vicariously, is that there are practitioners, longtime practitioners, applying the formula for years without seeing the efflorescence of consciousness that is purported to happen by application of that formula. And instead of perhaps reevaluating their understanding of the spiritual life as formula, the tendency is just to like double down and to work harder in the application of the formula. And it's kind of surprised me on a personal level for sure, but definitely in my observation of my own community, how the sense of the spiritual life unfolding in a formulaic way is not questioned. and that perhaps the fact that we're not experiencing the flowering of consciousness may be God himself asking us to look at our approach to the spiritual life as formula, and to allow like wiggle room, or in this case, like the sense of adventure, like you have to go on an adventure of reevaluation and reform, like to form again in a new and beautiful way. As I'm saying this, I'm remembering a scene in the Bhagavad Purana, the first canto, where Narada Muni, in his previous life, he learns from some sages. He ends up existing kind of on his own, traveling through many different cities and forests and so on as a sort of ascetic. And then at one point, we hear in this story his application of like a formula that gives him an epiphany of God. And right after the epiphany of God, the God epiphany disappears. And so he feels like mortally wounded by the greatest treasure gained and then lost. And so he again tries to apply the same technique in order to bring about the same epiphany, to which he is kindly informed by a sky voice that is said to be the voice of God, telling him that he can't be obtained by technique. And it is not technique that allows for the flowering of consciousness, but rather the heart's ardent ability for love. That may be a way that we would articulate it. And that love, and Gaudias, we have a way of talking about love. And one way we like to talk about love is that love moves in a cricket fashion. It doesn't move in a straightforward fashion, or in the case of the context of the question, it doesn't move in a formulaic way. And so he's told this by God as a sky voice. And so he reforms his approach where technique is de-emphasized, and let's say the movement of the heart in full honesty and in full pursuit of love, no matter where no matter where that pursuit is taking me. And in that reformation of the approach, toward the end of the life, we're told in the Bhagavad Purana, he experiences final apotheosis. He attains a spiritual form, and he becomes the famous Narada Muni that is known everywhere in Vedic culture. So that's kind of what I'm hearing. That's what I'm called to speak forward to the first part of the question. The second part of the question involves the implication of God as the adventurer. How did you put it? Can you, recapitulate that for me?
Sure. That God's adventurous nature suggests, what does it suggest about our own spiritual life and our own willingness to risk?
And our own willingness to risk, right? Yeah. When you were asking that question, my mind went to a scene in the Bhagavad Purana, also in the first volume of the Bhagavad Purana. And the scene is a depiction of a Mahabharata episode where Ashwatthama, who's, just for anyone who's not familiar with the characters of Mahabharata, Ashwatthama is an antagonist of the main protagonist of the story, the Pandavas. And so he releases a sort of atomic weapon called the Brahmastra. And that weapon is told in Vedic lore to have like the explosive power of let's say a contemporary atomic bomb, but have the precision to just hit his target without disturbing anything else. So we're told such a weapon is invoked through mantra or sound vibration. In any case, he releases 5 Brahmastras at the 5 Pandavas. And the Pandavas have 0 time to respond to that. And so Krishna, who is God from the Mahabharata, he is divinity itself, descended into this reality. He sees that those who are devoted to him are an imminent threat. And so he has to rescue them. But he made a particular vow not to participate in the war. And somehow, though this was toward the end of the war, this scene is depicted as still being within the confines of that vow not to participate in the war. And so for him to protect them would be a transgression of that vow. but he protects his devotees and he transgresses that vow nonetheless. And Bhaktivedanta Prabhupada, in his comment on this scene, he says many things, but the sentence that always stood out to me since the beginning was that it was more important for Krishna to be remembered as Bhakta Vatsala, one who is in love with, beholden to, who cares for his devotees, than as a strict moralist who never breaks his vow. And that sentence always really touched my heart about, for the culture of Vaishnavism, there are many avatars to whom one's heart can be devoted to. And usually the different līlās of these different avatars call out to the heart of the soul and binds them to that particular deity. So as a new bhakta in this tradition, reading this story, I remember my heart being bound to Krishna by the epiphany of this particular līlā or this particular story, because it was more important for him to be remembered in this way, as one who always loves his devotee and not as a strict moralist who never breaks his vow. So anyway, how this scene came up to me, because here there's a risk. The risk here is reputation being forever destroyed by a transgression of a vow. And for the religious culture of the time, and I would say even today, even though people tend to think themselves secular, they don't like lies. It's something very interesting. They don't like lies, even though there's, in one sense, no absolute moral standard to tell the truth. And especially in the context of a naturalist worldview where, survival of the fittest and only the strong survive, or whatever it is that informs their sort of framework, truth still seems to be most important for everyone. And so this is all the more so in the religious context of this culture. And even with the risk of Krishna, his whole reputation being utterly destroyed forever, that was inconsequential next to the destruction of his devotees unfairly. And so he takes a risk, out of love. And in a sense, this is the adventure of the spiritual life, I think, broadly speaking, as an archetype. And definitely more specifically speaking, especially I'm thinking of a Gaudiya tradition because that's my framework, that the preparedness to take all risk for love is itself a call to adventure. The main Līlā of Christian Līlā, the Rasa Līlā, opens up with the Abhisar, the night tryst, in which Krishna calls out to the soul, to the gopis, for love making and for love communion, bhakti yoga, for love communion. And the first thing they have to do is risk everything. That's the first step. The first step is to risk everything, including their physical bodies as they enter into the dark forest with many dangerous creatures, and their reputation. So not only are they risking physical death, but social death, definitely. And that's like the first step in the embrace of the call to love. And yeah, for me, this is the main adventure of Krishna as an avatar. His central Līlā of love is this Rasa Līlā, where its first opening scene is this, that for love, you're prepared to take all risk, even at the cost of social death and even at the risk of physical death. And yeah, I guess that's how I hear the implication of Krishna's Līlā in terms of the implication on our own life in the journey or love quest. That's the best I can do with,
Yeah,
managing my
that's awesome. That's awesome. And earlier in the book, in the beginning of the book, Maharaj mentions that love is the ultimate ethic.
Mm.
So I think that kind of addresses what you're talking to, that the ultimate ethic for Krishna is love, and that beats everything, anything else.
Yeah.
And also when you were speaking too about risk, I can't help but think that I think it is Srila Sridhar Maharaj who says that it feels like it's all risk, but then you realize actually there's no risk, that and any risk that was made is nothing in comparison to what is gained.
Right. I think it's the appearance or risk that is meant to test the nature our heart. And not only God like examining the nature of our heart, but really giving us the chance to examine the nature of our own heart.
Yeah.
So it has to at least look like risk so that we can have an epiphany about our own self and what it actually is most important to us. Is it love or is it something else? And the appearance of risk will allow us to see ourselves in that mirror, so to speak. So it has to at least look risky.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it is experienced as real risk. I mean, they are experiencing it as real risk. And it's kind of reminds me of, like a courageous person won't know their own courage until they come up against confront that. It's not that it wasn't there, but it has no place to come out. So for love, it needs, the space and the arena for that to really be drawn, to be created in the going through. So yeah, thanks for all of that.
What comes to my mind is with risk, like there's freedom also, which we often like give up when we start the practice. It's like, okay, we are given like this practice, certain rules and regulations, then that's it. We don't have the freedom. We don't use, we think we don't have the freedom and that we have to just stick to it. Like you were saying earlier, how when something doesn't work, we think we just like do more of it and it somehow would work. And yeah, it's puzzling, right? And I was thinking we also have this idea in the beginning that the material world is like a prison house where there's no freedom. But then our practice itself, we practice in a way that there is no freedom. Like, so I'm thinking, what is the idea here? So we are practicing no freedom, so spiritual world is also no freedom. Like, how does that work? Like, so yeah, I'm just like thinking about how risk taking is just such an integral part of this practice, like our freedom, like free will, like it is there, something that we often forget.
Yeah, for sure. And it is part, and it is amazing. It's again a paradox, freedom and risk. So it's what we need is the freedom to risk. And that's where something substantial can be developed in that. And also I'm again, it still goes along with the idea of the quest of us leaving behind the safety and being willing to explore and in trust as well. So all, that's there with risk. If it's like risk that's also based on trust. So it's as interesting paradoxes as well. So another thing that for me I see in you also, Jaya Jagannatha, is like a playfulness. Although you are like serious in many, many ways, I also see a playfulness and a kind of jokester, kind of beautiful and charming way.
Not everyone would agree with that last statement, but okay. Thanks.
This is what I've seen in you anyway. So this also is an amazing quality that of God that is very apparent in the Gaudiya conception of God, the playfulness, and not just that God is one who plays, but that he is really play himself. I mean, itself. So I'm wondering if you have anything that you'd like to share about play, like what changes in our conception of God when we consider that play is so important to him. that he and that play itself has no purpose. And it seems to kind of contradict what you were mentioning first about the formulaic kind of thing. I mean, God plays very creatively, very, very creatively. That's what play is. So, again, this seemingly contradiction between the God that we're worshiping and the way we think we need to get there.
Yeah, it's play and prema, or divine love, go well together. Because prema itself, the main message of love of the Bhagavad Purana, and therefore of the Gaudiya tradition, whose spirituality is rooted in the Bhagavad Purana, is that love is its own reward, or love is for itself, so to speak. Love seeks itself. Love seeks to be more love. It doesn't seek anything outside of itself. In the very opening statements of the Bhagavad Purana, love is described as ahaituki, apratiyata yayatma suprasidati. Ahaituki means without purpose, without any other purpose other than itself. And apratiyata, because of its blissful nature, it is uninterrupted. And so one can't, there isn't anything more joyful than the experience of said love. And there isn't anything more miserable than separation from said love. And for this reason, this love remains uninterrupted and without any other purpose. So this is the yayatma suprasidati. Only this love can really satisfy the self, somatically, psychologically, intellectually, ultimately on the soul level. So this is like opening statement of the Bhagavad Purana, and also in the central līlā of Krishna, the Rasa Līlā, this is the message where Krishna tells himself that although it is my ontology to respond in accordance with the nature of the approach to me, as he has mentioned this in Bhagavad Gita, he finds it impossible to reciprocate what love personified in the form of the gopis. And so he tells them, therefore, allow your love to be its own reward, because even God himself is unable to reciprocate with it. So this is like the central message of the Bhagavad Purana, the message of prema. And so it seems that the way that play is also described, the word līlā, or play, at least in the Vedanta, I think it must come in the Vedanta Sutra when this word līlā comes up. The example that is given, I'm not remembering precisely, but the example is given. I think it may have even been quoted by Maharaj in this particular section. Anyway, the example that is given of play is that play is for itself. It's like without rhyme or reason. And maybe the example is given like a person intoxicated. They're not doing anything for any purpose. They just do it out of exuberance. So this example was given. That is the nature of play. It's not for any particular reason, but it's just out of exuberance, out of the joy of itself, out of fullness it moves, and not out of any lack. So this is how play is at least thought of in the Gaudiya tradition for the most part. And so the two seem like, natural consorts. Play and prema, play and prema are natural consorts because they have the same nature of existing for itself. I think the difficulty for an individual, even conceiving of this, but also the experience of it, is that because play moves without any condition, the problem with it for us on our level is that it doesn't have any conditions. And so you can't predict how it's going to move and how it's going to unfold. And for the ego that seeks to control in order so that it can enjoy, to try to be reconciled to a reality that moves in its own accord, without any, like you can't predict it, you can't control it. You can only try to respond to it, and be reconciled to it in response. That is the beauty of such a conception, but also the rub for the conditioned psyche. It's beautiful to hear about the unconditioned realm from the perspective of like my demerits not being a problem. And therefore I could still move to a spiritual realm and be embraced by such a realm. But I've often thought about the difficulty of the unconditioned realm in terms of how it moves you in ways that are unpredictable. And if you're not yet fully reconciled to it, it can be devastating. I have this habit to offer, I like the anga of bhakti known as stuti, which means to recite the prayers that come in the scriptures. So I really appreciate that particular anga of bhakti. I love committing to memory a lot of different stutis and just recite them to the Lord. And I remember wanting to commit this Pritu Maharaj's stuti. Very beautiful stuti. It's only like not even 10 verses maybe. The last verse of his stuti, he says, just as a father does everything for the child without the child asking for anything, so you also do everything for my benefit without me having to ask. And I went to the altar to offer that prayer to the Lord, and I was like, hold up. Like, I need to think about the implication of what I'm saying here. Do anything? Like, he could do anything, it's for my benefit, but I don't have the perspective of infinity to always be able to appreciate how it is for my benefit in the long run or in the bigger picture of things. So I remember being unable to offer that prayer, although I found it very beautiful and I found it very attractive. I found it very attractive from the perspective of infinity. But from the perspective of my finitude, I found it very troubling. And so it is the whole concept of prema and play. I from the perspective of the infinite world, it's very beautiful and it's seductive even. And it kind of beckons to the soul because I feel that the soul is already in harmony with such a truth and its natural ontology. But my soul is enveloped with a psyche and a physical body, which has doubts and misgivings and this, that, and the other. And so, yeah, the concept of play in prema has also been troubling. Like, how do I become reconciled to such a reality when it starts moving in my life right now, as it starts unfolding right now, the play of God in my own life, and it moves in ways that are, let's say, adventurous. Adventurous, yeah. Sorry, I'm a yapper, so.
No, those are great considerations, and I wonder. I mean, obviously you do because you just said it, but maybe we could explore more directly. Do you think that that more would be asked of you than from God himself? I understand that there might be people here who might ask more than you're capable of giving, but in the realm of play and in the basis of trust and knowing and accepting who God is, that he's our dearmost friend. He is love itself. And I just wonder, do you think that he would ask us to give more than we're ready to give? And if so, would we hear it even? Because the opportunity is always there. And I think it's our own incapacity that doesn't allow us to recognize how much is coming. So it's kind of like something that's a protection that's kind of built in. Ignorance is built into the system for our own protection in a way.
I love that. There's a lot of books today written about like ego is the enemy, and ego is bad essentially. And I'm like, are y'all sure about that? I don't know about y'all, but I kind of appreciate a healthy ego. Like when I look out at the world and people are confused about what species they are, I can really appreciate like a healthy ego that helps me to like navigate the world. Like I think that counts for something. So ego isn't really the enemy, but the attachment to ego definitely is a problem. Not only just for the conventional life, but also for the spirit life. The attachment to the ego is what gets us, not the ego itself, but our attachment to it, and are not allowing for, because the ego as an element of nature has a lot of plasticity. In order for it to remain healthy, it has to actually break down and be formed again. That's the nature of just the element of ego. At least in the Sankhya system of the Bhagavad Purana, it's an element of the psyche. And in order for it to maintain health, it must be disintegrated and formed again. So if we're attached to the ego in one form and we don't allow it to go through that transformation, then it becomes an obstacle to even our practical life, what to speak of the spirit life. And so it is also with the spirit life that, for me, I feel like once you've really understood the message of love coming from the Shastra through the mouth of the gurus and the sadhus, once you've understood the message of love, love has called you. Now, it may take some time to actually understand that message. And that's one thing I have appreciated in my years in the Sangha of devotees, is that most people don't actually understand what love is. Even though they've heard scriptures for even decades, they don't know what love is. So having not understood it, they have not yet been called in that sense. But once you understand, then the call is upon you. You know, I have this I have this memory. It's an anecdote, quick anecdote, but I was a book distributor and I'm at a college university, DePaul University. This is in Chicago. And I'm trying to distribute a book to a young man, and he just flicks me off and, no, I don't want that book. And he starts walking off, Catholic guy, and he starts walking off. So as he's walking off, I yell out to him that the reason you don't want this book, Bhagavad Gita, is because you will understand the truth that reality, the truth of reality, and that will impose upon you, that understanding itself will impose upon you a greater responsibility. And he turned around, looked me dead in my eye and said, exactly, that's why I don't want that book. And I was like, word, that was such a funny experience. I'll never forget it. It's like etched in my psyche forever. So yeah, once you understand the message of love, then it calls to you. And I feel it's at that time that you start to feel the pressure of the call, so to speak. And I think I think that's what they would call crisis. You know, although the word crisis is taken as a negative word, it kind of just means a decision where, you know, you're at a crossroads, and the decision you make at that crossroads has implications for your future, essentially. So I feel like what happens, I would say, I feel like I've experienced this also. I think this happens to a lot of practitioners. Once you understand the call of love, then you're put into crisis, and crisis as decision, like make a decision. And then at that time, I think some people can, like some devotees, some pilgrims on the path of love, they might collapse back into the ego, which they're familiar with and known, and they don't cross the threshold into that other space that's going to mean likely breakdown and reformation and, you know, the adventure of blossoming in love and blossoming before God. So yeah.
And what you said also was I think really important about being honest. You know, you and that guy also was very honest. You were honest with yourself. I love this prayer, but yeah, I'm not there. So that's kind of like our adhikari, you know, knowing where it is that we stand in both directions. Like, no, I'm not there yet. And yes, I am there yet. And now I have to accept responsibility of actually where I am. So to be honest and accept in both directions. No, I'm not ready to tread there. And yes, actually, I need to step there and step up. I guess a difficulty is when we try to fake it until we make it. Unlike Maharaj says, to be naked till we make it.
Right.
Yeah, that's
I have some more thoughts on that, but straight to Dweepa's here. I don't want to, because I'm a yapper.
Please go ahead. I was just thinking, I was
You
just
can-
thinking, I just want to listen to you. It was amazing. I mean, I really like everything you were sharing. I mean, especially the part you were saying how ego is not a bad thing, you know? I mean, oftentimes, at least like, you know, in our spiritual, once we start on this spiritual journey, we have this idea that like there's ego and we don't want it. It's bad thing. You have to drop the ego. But you were saying what you really need to drop is a certain like, you know, makeup of that ego. And then that needs to be like, you know, disoriented and like, you know, built up again. Like, wow. So it's really, there is nothing that we ever have to reject. Like our philosophy says, right? Everything is in service and everything is sacred and beautiful. So yeah, like I really liked everything you were sharing there. Um, yeah,
I
I'd
think
like to, please.
one of the rub points for me about your last point, Bhakti Rasa, is honesty. Sometimes sometimes honesty seems to me a very subtle reality to stand in. Because on the one hand, we can tell ourselves, I'm just being honest for where I'm at to justify attachment. And another can be, I'm being honest with where I'm at, and it's like the right move in relationship to a certain reality that we're not yet equipped to traverse. And so both can be true. And it's not that it's not that it's so easy for an individual to ascertain for themselves. Not that it's impossible. Obviously, I think with a little bit of introspection, one can understand. But it's not, I feel like at times it's not so easy to know in which mode your claim to honesty is operating in. Is it operating out of justification for attachment, or is it operating out of a genuine understanding and therefore need for building up capacity before moving into a certain domain of life? And yeah, I was thinking about, I don't know if you've seen Bhaktivinoda Thakur's essay on Niyamagraha. So he has this, in ISKCON spaces, they've rendered it as a book called Bhakti Aloka, but it's just 12 essays on verses 2 and 3 of Upadeshamrita. And you know, the 6 destroyers of bhakti and then the 6 enhancers of bhakti, so to speak. And so one of the elements that is said to destroy bhakti is niyama agraha, like clinging too tightly to basically one position or not clinging tightly enough. That's how I like to articulate it. And so the way Bhaktivinoda Thakur expands on it is that there's like the goal that you're trying to reach and where you're at, and there's so many stages in between. And he says basically each stage has its own ethic or like its own rules. And when you allow yourself to apply the rules or apply the ethic on that level, you gain adhikar, you gain capacity for forward movement. And then he says at that time, when you've gained capacity for forward movement, you can enter into a niyama agraha where you cling to the level that you're familiar with. And that causes, actually, it can cause degradation even. And then he says, you know, conversely, you're at one level, but you try to follow the ethic on a level that you're not ready for. And that also causes degradation. And so whenever we've discussed this point in the past, the question always comes, well, how do you know? You know, how do you know when my honesty is operating in the field of truth and not in the field of justification? And yeah, so I want to just throw that out there as a food for thought sort of question, because it seems to me a subtler thing than we maybe give credit for.
Yeah, agree. So what's your answer when they ask that question?
I always like to start my answers with, I don't know.
Or it depends.
Yeah, I was thinking, so if you're not clinging to what you're familiar with or what you can resonate with, and also not like trying to pretend to be somewhere where we are not, then where do we exist? Like in between?
Yeah. I wrote a poem. I don't know, maybe this is a space for it, but I wrote a poem called Betwixt. which is archaic. It's an archaic word for in between. And should I read that? Maybe I can pull it up.
Please, love it.
I don't remember if the poem, it's not even a fully formed poem. But it was meant to try to convey the experience of being like in an in-between space and not not knowing what to do. Okay, let's come back to that. I have to look it up. I have to go in my like Substack, and I thought it would be already there, but it's not.
One thing that's coming to me while you're looking for that, if you're continuing, is the willingness to just sit with the unknowing. That why rush it until something actually, moves within us, that we can sit with the unknowingness, and it doesn't have to be an escapist kind of thing, but it's actually part of knowing and a service to our journey, to just admit, I don't know, I'm going to sit and listen.
Well said. I often talk with my friends about the pace of things and how the pace of things determines a different outcome. And, in the context of postmodernity, the contemporary world, because our pace is so fast in almost every domain, it often causes disaster. Just like, for example, when you consider the pace in which people move to know things. Now there's ChatGPT. So like I'm old enough to remember having to go to the library and go to the encyclopedia section. And, the process of gaining knowledge was such a long one. And the pace of that process ensured that when you knew something, you really knew it. And it could be some very small item of knowledge, but you really knew it because of the pace that it took you to integrate that piece of knowledge. But now, because we have ChatGPT, you're arguing with someone on the internet and they happen to say a really good point that actually causes you pause and makes you consider, but you just want to win the argument. So you go to ChatGPT, you put in the right prompt, and then you get an answer really fast that justifies your own position. And now you make a claim to knowledge that isn't really true because the pace, it's too fast. You haven't actually gone through the process of digestion and integration, et cetera. And so it is with our spiritual practices that the pace, at least, especially the way that we think about the unfolding of a spiritual life, for example, it's all got to happen in this one lifetime. That's just an example of an idea of a fast pace. It can happen in this lifetime, but probably it would be safe to say that a lot of us, where we're standing now in our own journeys, could be the work of cumulative lifetimes and not just this one lifetime. We only have access to the one lifetime. And so if you're thinking that you have to accomplish all things, in this long journey toward the kingdom of love, it has to be accomplished now. That thinking, that fast-paced thinking, it really changes the relationship that you have with your own process. And I feel that for a lot of us postmoderns, it's changed it for the worse. And in terms of how it gets expressed in our psychological processes, often as shame, embarrassment, feeling demoralized, crestfallen, a lot of these negative emotions tend to grip at the psyche, but mostly because our pace in relationship to our process is too fast, at least the way that we think about it. And so I like the idea of just we're gripped by a certain existential dilemma and we can just sit. It's not that you have to respond right away. First, you need to understand what's actually happening with you. And that could take a long time. It could take years. It might even take decades, who knows? But to allow yourself the space to just sit and just at least look at it and then try to ascertain what it is before needing to immediately respond. Okay, I just need to panicking, this sort of frenetic energy. I'll chant more, I'll pray more hard. It's no, babe, just calm down. Take a breather, just look and see what's happening. And I really appreciate that. I would say a reminder and call.
Yeah, that's, I mean, I'm kind of in that phase in my life right now, you know, like in between. Although I asked the question, where are you in between? I am actually in between, not knowing what to do. But, you know, like being part of this, like Sangha with Padmanabha Maharaj, Bhakti Rasa, you know, like where this is talked about a lot. Like, you know, it's okay to be here. There is no rush. You don't need to force something that's not natural. You know, if we are not able to chant and if we are not able to find meaning in what we are doing, then we shouldn't be doing that mechanically. You know, just go with the process naturally, like that. So yeah, I mean, other thing that came to my mind with in between is also that how everything is a paradox, and paradox is also in between. You know, so it makes so much sense that somehow we're always in between. And isn't that our nature also, the tatastha shakti is in between always?
Nice. I don't know how you want to edit this in, but I did find my poem, and
Please
like
share.
just in solidarity with Shrita Dweep, I very much am in a betwixt space. I kind of like to think of it like a chrysalis because it's a positive reframing for me. But you know, in the chrysalis, the body of the caterpillar is dissolved to almost nothing. What survives the dissolution process are like a few, there's some technical term, I looked it up the other day, like some disc. I don't know what those discs are, but basically there's like a few things that survive the initial dissolution. And out of those items, the new body is formed again. So I felt like I've been in a dissolution process, I would say for the last decade, but the intensity and sort of the acknowledgement of the enormity of what was happening has been like the last 3 years. And yeah, I feel kind of like utterly dissolved. But what survived the dissolution process is my faith. Like, you know, I would say I've prided myself on my faith being largely wedded to scripture, specifically Srimad Bhagavatam. And so despite all my existential dilemmas, which are a lot at the moment, that has remained. And I feel I've started to feel that to be like a disc out of which the new formation can take place. And so that framing of my experience has given me hope. And I consider like a positive reframe. Otherwise, you're just dealing with very big emotions all the time, which can be, it just could be tiring. Like, I'm tired. Like, I don't want to feel like this all the time. It's like, no, baby, you're being dissolved. You're going to feel like this a lot. So you need like a framework that allows you to hold that without feeling like, you know, this is it for me. You know, let's just, it's a wrap this life. You know, it's over. Anyway, so in that space, I wrote this poem. I wrote it probably about a month ago. In this form, it's not fully completed, but it's called Betwixt. And because I love archaic words, like the old world has so many cool words. Like English is, we've really been robbed of some of our really cool words that expresses things nicely. But here's a poem, at least in short. Betwixt is a riven cloud, the pilgrim's journey, the threshold from non-being to becoming. Betwixt is the seed in the dark night of the soil, the babe in the womb, the nymph in the chrysalis tomb. Betwixt is the dusk and the dawn, and the tragic end before the new beginnings of things to spawn. Betwixt is my heart that hopes for beatitude, but doubts with despair afflicting limbs, parched by the desert sun and no oasis in view. I envy the folly of the fool and the wisdom of the sage, standing in the joy of the respective domains, unlike I with mine betwixt these two, suffering a divided heart. I saw the reflection of my heart betwixt in the mirror of the gnarled pilu tree, enduring despite the weariness of its lot, and an inimitable beauty, protesting against the conquest of apathy, even amid the indignities of its liminality. And so betwixt I stand, reaching for the sky and sinking in the sand, like the image of Methuselah, which is it's a very famous gnarled like twisted tree in one part of the North America. May the words of the beloved prove true, that he who reaches forever love cannot be conquered by evil. That's the end of it. So
Wow.
yeah, the image of the pilu tree are the trees in Vrindavan. They're like very twisted, you know, and their forms, their roots come out of the ground, and the form is like very twisted. So I was like, yeah, I saw my reflection in the gnarled pilu, you know, because it's like very twisted, betwixt twisting. So that image of the tree was like representative of what the heart felt like twisted. And that sensation is part of this space where you feel like kind of like twisted. And yet, despite its, you know, because it lives in desert type land, so it lives in a very austere condition, but it remains alive and it flourishes even despite the conditions. And so the gnarled pilu became like the image of like hope. Like despite its condition, its twisted condition, it still flourishes. It still blossoms. Honestly, they look very beautiful because they're just so intriguing. You know, it's not just like straight up. There's something beautiful about the image of the gnarled pilu. So I was looking for hope in that image, and it inspired me to write this. Anyway, this is something from the heart about the nature of this space.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, thanks for giving a glimpse and for giving hope. And it goes again, speaking to what you were talking about, the going through. You know, what you're looking at when looking at the tree is its process, not so much its beginning where the roots are or the end of it, even the fruits of it. You're looking at the process of it. So that is where we exist in the going through, especially in a tradition where, you know, there is no end goal. The end goal is the going through, and there's no fixed maximum, and it's simply a process of becoming. So yeah, beautiful images for all of that, and the struggle also that's involved, and how that forms a kind of character of the tree, of us, creates character. Thank you.
Wow. I really like the poem. I mean, I couldn't catch all the lines, but you know, a few things I could catch, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. One thing that I caught immediately was seed in the dark soil, like saying dark night of the soul. Like that was amazing. How you made the words there. Sorry?
I said a little pun there, the seed in the dark night of the soil.
Yeah. Yeah, but it makes so much sense, right? Like the seed is in the soil, that like what is yet to come is like so exciting. But for that, the seed has to remain in the dark.
Yeah, totally.
All the best.
Yeah.
I'm often fond of saying this to friends as we are all in our process. All the best. Because it's tremendous subjectively, however small we are. You know, our influence may be zero, but the subjective experience of such a process is enormous. And yeah, it's trying on our faculties, and it's also in a sense trying on the soul. So we kind of say in jest, all the best. You know, but it's just like the phrase itself is so like almost facetious. But it's also like very genuine, like, yeah, all the best. It's gonna be a doozy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, another thing is that like we all have our unique journey, but knowing that this phase of like, you know, crisis is something that we're all going through, although in our own like, you know, unique ways, it's comforting, like, you know, to have this company. And I see with many other friends also that we often doubt, like, are we okay? You know, like, are we still going ahead? But then just relating, we feel like, okay, yeah, that's fine. You know, I mean, we are okay. We don't have to worry, even though it looks like we're going in a completely opposite direction, or like backwards, or falling down, and all these phrases that we've heard of, right? So yeah, I think it's, I mean, to me at least, I feel that's very comforting to have this company, to know there are fellow pilgrims, you know, in this journey, going through this same, I mean, similar crisis.
Jay Radhe. So Bhakti Rasa, are you satisfied with the direction of the conversation so far? Because it's not fully on theme of one. In one sense, it is. You know, the process is wonder inspiring, at least subjectively speaking. Numinous, even. I know this word numinous means. I heard the word numinous is a translation of a Latin word, mysterium tremendum e fascinas, where like a mystery that's like overwhelming and kind of like even frightening on the one hand, but so fascinating that it can't be resisted. And so I forget which theologian first coined this phrase numinous, but I think he was inspired by this Latin phrase to coin the word. Maybe it was a neologism. I don't know how to say that word. Neologism, like when you make up new words. It's called neo. Academics do it all the time. Anyway, so I think the word is numinous, a mystery, you know, something that's overwhelmingly like awe-inspiring and frightening, but also like fascinating. So in speaking of the process, we have given voice to the wonder, the numinosity of the process of the spirit. But I don't know if we've touched on all the elements that were brought up in that section of Marge's book. I don't know.
Well, we have touched on what time allows, and this is just simply the beginning.
Okay.
You know, there's so many beginnings of conversations. This hopefully is the beginning of further conversations. That last thing that you said, how much it points to the paradox again of God's own nature, his own nature. You have anything, parting words, Dweep, that you'd like to?
No, I think, I mean, we can go on, you know, like for hours. like you said, yeah, it's a beginning. Yeah, there's so many things we could talk about, but also want to honor the time. So, oh.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for joining us here in the conversation, Jaya Jagannatha.
Thank you for having me. I hope my yapping wasn't too time waste. You know, I often feel that, you know, in my previous, before my own, let's say, dissolution reformation process, I really prided myself on being like methodical in my articulation. I still think I have some element, you know, I have an active intelligence. I have some element of still being articulate, but I found my articulation to be a lot more like chaotic and like kind of like a lot more emotional, even though externally it's just like very like directional. It sounds very directional, but my experience of my articulation is like very chaotic. Like I'm trying to like weave a few pieces together at the same time, and I feel like it could be frustrating for a hearer who's hearing that. But yeah, it expresses just like it's a space that I prefer to operate in at the moment, as it's just sort of a more raw me, and a more raw expression of the process of spirit life. You know, as you're in a process of dissolution or reformation, it feels chaotic, and so even if you're articulate, your articulation is going to be chaotic. So this is me like kind of apologizing if it was like that. And I'm also a yapper, so the two can.
And it's interesting because it didn't land on me at all. It was quite followable. Maybe because I'm in chaos in my own mind, so therefore we match quite nicely. But yeah, it's always honest disclosure is definitely more welcomed, necessary, than something fake and nice and clean and neat.
Okay, thank you for that generosity.
So thank you very much. And we're going to invite everyone out there to take a pause and to consider the different points that were brought up in this conversation and this section of evolution and divine love.
Reflect on the paradox of God's simultaneous changelessness and ever freshness, and notice how these concepts resonate within you. Do they settle deeply, affirming an intuitive sense of the divine? Or do they stir questions still seeking resolution? Before moving on to the next section, listen closely to the responses that arise within and consider how you might best honor them.